Okay, y'all, this morning we were going to talk about triangle congruence, different ways that we can prove that two triangles are the same shape and size. You need to read this vocabulary first because I'm going to assume that you understand the vocabulary as I go through this video. So make sure you start by reading this vocabulary, talking about it with your team, looking at the different markings that we use. Notice we're using little lines to indicate that two sides of two different triangles are congruent. We are also using these little curved lines to indicate angles are congruent. And notice down here, if we have more than one angle, we're using two lines to indicate that angle is congruent to the other one, but different from this one that only has one line. So again, check this out. Look at the markings. Definitely look at this area right here. These are the different ways that we're going to prove that these triangles are congruent. You're going to need to know those. All right, so when we look at these triangles, first, it's really important that we name these in a very specific way. So if I start with side C over here, when I name it congruent to my other triangle, I need to start with angle E over here. So we're going to be doing, for example, if I said CBA, so I went C to B and then up to A, then I need to do the same thing going to the corresponding angles on this triangle. Well, B is going to be the same as D over here. So we're going to go E to D to F. And again, that is required. If you name these in the wrong order, naming non-corresponding parts together, that's a problem. And what I mean by that is that C and E are congruent angles. B, what the heck going on with my pencil here? Okay, B and D are congruent angles, and A and F are congruent angles. So that is very important that all of those parts line up correctly. And then what information did we have? Well, we started at C, which was an angle, so that's an angle. Then we went to another angle, so that's an angle. And then over here, we have a side. So this is by angle, angle, side. And then if you look up at our congruence markings, angle, angle, side is right here. Two angles in a row and then a side. Now, if you had started, I'm going to clear this off just so you can see what I'm saying. But if we had started up here at A, there's no congruence markings there, so you would never start there. But if you started at B instead, you would try to do angle, side, then you'd have to skip this angle and skip this side. We can't do that. We need to go in order. So there's a reason that I picked specifically to start with angle C, and that's because, again, I can see that the next piece of information I have is right next to it, and the next piece of information is right there. You can skip one angle or side, but you cannot skip more than one. All right, let's look at this next one and see what information we are given and what we can figure out on our own. So they told us that this side and this side are congruent. They also didn't label this at all, so I'm going to label this A, B, C, D. And so we also know that angle A is congruent to angle C. And that's only two pieces of information. And if you look back up at the rules that we're using, we need at least three. So the other piece of information we know, even though they didn't tell us directly, is that this side of this triangle is the same as this side of that other triangle because they're the same side, obviously. So because they are the same side, they must be equal to each other. So now we have an additional piece of information. So let's see what we have. We have starting here, starting here, we have angle, side, side. We skipped this angle over here, but like I said, we can skip one, so that's okay. If we went this way, we would have side, skip an angle, angle, side, but that's different. When you have side, angle, side, there should be no skips in between. So this is side, side, angle. When I look up for a side, side, angle, I do not see side, side, angle as being one of my options here. But the other thing I know, this one's a little trickier than what we would give you on day one normally, because we haven't gone over this part, but we are going to go over this. These two angles, wow, that's very thick. Okay, anyway, these two angles also have to be congruent if these lines are in fact parallel. So because these lines are parallel, those other angles have to be congruent. So then we do have side, angle, side. So we're going to say that triangle, I'm going to start with the yellow one, ADC. So triangle ADC is going to be congruent to C corresponds to A, B corresponds to D, and then back to A, which is actually the same as C over here. It's a little confusing because this triangle is actually in a rectangle. But we're going to start at C, go to B, and end with A. And those two triangles are congruent, and we know that they are congruent by side, angle, side. Okay. Anytime you see a right angle, you want to be aware of one of our special rules, which is called hypotenuse leg. Now notice it's the only one that only has two pieces of information, but it's actually hiding a third piece of information, which is that they must be right triangles. So if and only if they are right triangles, and you are given both the hypotenuse and the leg to be congruent, then we know these triangles are congruent. So when we look here, we know these are right triangles. So that's condition one has been met. We know that this side is congruent to that side. And that is the hypotenuse of both of these triangles. So now we have the hypotenuse required of hypotenuse leg. And then lastly, we have this other leg over here. So that is at least one more leg, giving us hypotenuse leg. And now we just have to carefully name these. Let's just start with angle C. CAB, Y and C are the same, and then Z and A are the same. So this is going to be Y, Z, X. And again, I'm saying the same. What I mean is they're congruent. So angle A is congruent to angle Z. Once I know that the triangles are congruent, then I know this corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, which is just telling you, once you know the triangle's congruent, you know that all parts of that triangle are congruent. So even though hypotenuse leg didn't tell me anything about the angles, I now know that all of the angles are also congruent. Okay, this next example requires that you remember that vertical angles are congruent. If you take two lines and bisect them, or they come together at a single point, the angles that they create will always be congruent. So what we're given here is two angles that must be congruent and sides. So again, this is going to be side, angle in between, side. And let's go ahead and name this triangle A, B, C, D, E. So really carefully here, angle C is congruent to itself. So let's go ahead and start with that one. Going out from angle C, we would go to A or we would go to D. So those are going to be congruent to each other. So this is going to be A and this is going to be D. Whoa. D. And then lastly, we would go down to E or up to B. So this is going to be B and E again. Okay, last two, we got this. Again, anytime you see these intersecting triangles like this, vertical angles are congruent. Now we have angle, side, angle. Again, angle, side, angle. Those are congruent. So that's the reason down here. Let me go ahead and label these. I think on your notes we labeled them, I hope. If not, just match them to mine. A, B, C, D, E. Okay, so we know that A and E are the same. A is congruent to E. And then if we go into the center for B, those are going to be the same because, again, we said vertical angles are congruent. So B could be next for both of them. And then, of course, on the left, we done with C, and on the right, we would end with D. And again, once I know these triangles are congruent, this needs another marking because we already had an angle marking, then I would also know that this one is congruent. Okay, last but not least, we have two sides that are given, but they did not tell me anything else. But because these are on, oops, that only needs one. These are touching each other. Those are definitely congruent as well. A, B, C, D. So if we start at A over here, we would start at D over here. A is congruent to D. Then if we go up to B, B is the same for both of them. So B is congruent to B. And then we would go down to C, and C would be congruent for both of them as well. And then the reason here is side, side, side. All of the sides are the same, so these must be the same size triangle. All right, so again, what is really important here is that we name these in a very specific order, naming corresponding or congruent parts together. And then we end by telling how we know that these things are congruent given the given information and any information that we can deduce, like vertical angles and same sides being congruent to one another. I hope you have a wonderful day. See you all tomorrow.